Welcome, everybody, to 52 Living Ideas. We are going through the Gospel of John. We are on chapter 15. I think today we are going through verses 18 through 21. Gary has an amazing presentation for us. So we're going to go through the presentation. It's divided into three parts. Gary's going to talk about the first part, then I'm going to talk about it. We'll go to the second one, do the same, and then go to the third one, and then we'll open it up for discussion. We're going to cover a lot of areas, so please keep track of all the questions, all the comments that you have. We'll have plenty of opportunity to go through it. All right, Gary, let's get started.
All right. There we go. Can everybody see that?
Yes.
All right. So it's based on our readings that are also in Aquinas commentary in the sections that he's laid out. And so I've divided this one into three parts, the state of affairs in three parts. And this presentation is about the cosmos and humanity. And so the first part, we're just going to go ahead and read the verses that we're covering and the commentary. And I have this picture here. Some of you might recognize it. That's Pope Francis. And on the Thursday before Easter, there's a special service in the Catholic tradition where the priest, whoever's officiating the service, will wash the feet of the parishioners. And this is Pope Francis washing feet. And this is a tradition that some churches still do. You don't see it very often, but I always love that the Pope, the head of the Catholic Church, takes the time to actually wash people's feet. So John 15, 18 through 21, I have it up on the text on the screen so we can all read it together. If the world hates you, you know that it hated me before it hated you. If you were of the world would love its own. Yet because you are not of the world, but I chose you out of the world, therefore the world hates you. Remember the word that I said to you, a servant is not greater than his master. If they persecuted me, they will also persecute you. And if they kept my word, they will keep yours also. But all these things they will do to you for my name's sake, because they do not know him who sent me. So like I said, we're doing it in three parts, and I'll go through the first part, and then we'll probably go through the slides a second time with Shrikant's comments. This is actually something my professor kept reminding me over and over again whenever we talk about the cosmos in the Gospel of John. And he says, don't forget that John uses this word world in at least two perceptions, two ways. And the first is that this is a world that God loves. And you can't forget that this is God's good creation. And so the cosmos, the Greek word for the world is the cosmos, and includes all of creation, the entire created order. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. And it includes humanity, which God made divine, even in the Christian tradition. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, God created him, male and female, he created them. And here's the big thing is after he creates everything in the original account, it says creation is very good. And God saw that everything that he made, and behold, it was very good. And so we have to have this picture before we look at it all, of a good, God's good creation is the nutshell of it. It's kind of an important sticking point because in some of the early traditions, there came to be this belief that what is material is evil and what is spiritual is good. And so we begin with the premise that we don't have this dichotomy between the spiritual and the material as one being good, one as being evil, but that all of it is good. Something that's frequently missed, especially from our perspective, is when we look at the creation accounts, like in the Garden of Eden, is that it uses a lot of temple imagery. And this is something in previous slide presentations that I've brought up before, is that the tree is on the holy mountain. It's an axis mundi, it's a place where God and humanity meet. You have these 4 streams of water that are flowing out of it. And if we remember, like the Gospel of John, Jesus talks about streams of water flowing out of him, and watering everything and going into the desert. And so you have all of this temple imagery that's there. There's also even the words that are used to serve and to keep, to dress it and keep it. These are words that are used of the priestly service in the temple. They're keeping and maintaining the temple structure and the temple area, and they're there serving. We see that as in the context of mankind in the garden, is keeping the garden, tending to the garden. And this is also when God talks about the law, it's like to love the Lord your God, and him only shall you serve. It's the same word there. And you shall keep all the commands which I have commanded you. Jesus repeats this. And these are the same words that are being used. And so this language of the law and the temple and the covenant, all of this is being evoked from the very beginning in the first chapter or 2 of Genesis. And the idea, though, is that where humanity was created living in God's house with God. And it wasn't just a lazy life where we did nothing. We had work to do. We were there serving God and enjoying his presence was the main thing that's being pictured there. And this I already just talked about, is that it's situated on the holy mountain, that there's the presence of God, you have these streams of water. And the idea is that humanity is portrayed as the priests of Eden and as the stewards of all of God's creation. We're there. It's not just the garden, it's all of creation, all of God's creation. We're here maintaining and preserving that. That's the picture, and that's part 1. The rest is part 2. All right, Shrikant, what do you have
All
to
right,
say?
let's go back.
Want me to stop sharing or just go back?
I just want to go back. I'm going to go through the same slides.
Okay.
Let's go back for the first slide. All the way back. Okay, we'll start with this one.
Okay. There's the title page, or then there's
this one, right? The next one now. John 15. Okay. So if the world hates you, you know that it hated me before it hated you. Now, when you read the word hate in Greek, it's very interesting. Hate is one translation. The other translation is esteem less or love less. Okay, the best way I understand this passage is with the idea of center and periphery. God or godliness is in the center. It is the true vine from which the sap flows into the periphery, which bears fruit. So it is moving from center out. The world is at the periphery. And wants the fruits that are produced by God, but does not love the center. It loves the center less. So it's turning its back on the center and is looking at the periphery. That is the position of most of the people in the world. So if you reread it as hate instead of hate, if you love less. So the world loves you less. And why is it that the world loves you less? Because the world loved him less. And why is it? Because, jump to the last line, they do not know him who sent me. So the true vine is at the center from which the world is coming. The material world is coming. And the world loves the center less, loves God less than the creations of God. They love thou less than the 10,000 things. They are attached to the 10,000 things in the terminology of Gita. Because they are inverted, the thing is, as Gary rightly pointed out, it is not spiritual versus material. It is not root versus the fruit. Root is God and fruit is the product of God. But if you only want the fruit and you don't care about the tree, you don't care about the branches, you don't care about the root, then you do not like God. You love God less. You're turning away. And if a person is like that, who loves God less, then he loves Jesus less. And because he's saying, you love me, you love Jesus, and you are focused on the center, and you are trying to move towards the center, the world is going in the opposite direction. That's why the world is going to love you less or hate. Either way, it's the same word. Okay, so that's my observation. So center and periphery actually captures this, and it captures it in all these three traditions, Tao Te Ching, Bhagavad Gita. So Bhagavad Gita would say that it is your Atma. You're getting attached to your feelings, external things, material things. You're getting attached, and you are loving your Atma less. You're loving Brahma less. Tao Te Ching will say that people are focused on 10,000 things and not the Tao. All of them are, is the same thing. All right, let's go to the next one. So now this entire presentation is divided into three parts. This is the Eden part, then there is the middle part, and then there is the Jesus part. Okay, so we got these three sections. So this is the first section. So I'm going to spend some time on Eden because Eden is short. I've read it well. The second part is too long. I don't have a very good grasp of it. So I'm going to have very little to say about it. Gospel of John, I love a lot. So I have a lot to say about that one as well. So but I do have things to say here. So let's go to the next slide. I'll start with the next slide. So what is the condition of Adam? Who is Adam? Okay, God has asked Adam to work, to serve, to keep, to preserve things. So he has asked him to take certain actions, to obey. Now, it's very important. If you want to understand the third part, if you want to understand Jesus, you have to know what is missing here in this picture. In Eden, there is something missing. What is missing? God has said, do not eat the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Adam does not know. He does not know God. Even though God is right there, he doesn't know God. Okay? These two trees, there is a tree of eternal life and tree of the knowledge of good and evil. These are the two trees. God has only told him about the tree of, the knowledge of good and evil. It's not told him about the tree of eternal life. And the question is also why. Okay? And remember that when he screws up, the reason God throws him out and bars him from returning is that so that he cannot touch the tree of eternal life. Okay? You have to understand this to see what is missing in Adam. There is something missing in Adam, something that he does not have, which Jesus had, which he does not have in the beginning. This is even before he eats the fruit. He doesn't have, which Jacob has. Okay, so what is it? At best, he can obey God. He cannot understand good. He doesn't know, he cannot know good. he's really not conscious. He's not able, he is not in a position to actually understand God. Okay, let me elaborate it in two different ways. Let's jump to chapter 15 of Gospel of John. Again, I love Gospel of John, so I can always relate it to that. Okay, it's the same issue of the vine. The root of the tree of knowledge, from which the sap is producing, creates the fruit. All that Adam wants is the fruit, doesn't want to be the branch. He doesn't want to bring forth the fruit in himself. He doesn't want to know, just wants the products of knowledge. It's the same if you go back to the verses that we read. He is like the world. In that action of wanting the fruit, he's saying no to the vine. He's saying no to the true vine. He's refusing to let that flow through him. Though God is right there, the grace is right there. So he's not conscious, he wants just the fruits. Okay. Now, God knows that he is not really ready for it. Now, for all the greatness of, of the creation of Adam, I have to say, using one of the lines from the debate, I knew Jesus, Jesus is my friend, and Adam is no Jesus. Okay. He does not have, just fast forward to the first lines of Gospel of John. In the beginning was the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things were made through him. Now, that in the beginning, Jesus is the vine. All things are flowing. God is flowing through him. The Word is actually making God self-conscious through the Word and him conscious of God. So the knowledge of God is right there in the beginning. The best Adam can do is to obey God. There is the wall that separates between God and Adam, which cannot be, he's not really ready for it, because God knows that if he tries to go for it, he's just going to go for the fruit. Okay, he doesn't have what it takes to get to the vine. Now, this is a deeper point. These two trees, this is the cross. The tree of knowledge of good and evil going horizontally, and the tree of eternal life going vertically. If you know God, we're going to come to that, eternal life is simply about knowing God. So you need the entire cross. Entire cross comes as a package. And with that you get eternal life. And you have to pay the price for doing that. So all of these are going to come together. Both these trees are going to come together in the cross, in Jesus. Jesus will have the knowledge of God. He will be a branch. People who understand him, his word, will be branches. Through them, fruit will be brought forth. None of that is possible here with Adam at his best. because he doesn't know. He's not conscious. He's at that stage. And his desire to know is going to just get at the fruit. So that is the condition in this first part, as I see it. All right, let's go over to you, Gary. Again, let me just, these priests and stewards, right? These are basically servants of God. At best, they are servants of God. They occasionally get some kind of information from God. They do not know gods. They are servants. They are not sons. This is the distinction that Gospel of John makes very beautifully. Servant, we studied this in, I think, last time. Servant is one who doesn't know the master, doesn't know God. He can obey God, but he doesn't know God. A son knows God. That is very, very different than being a steward, being a priest. Becoming a son requires that knowledge, requires that intimacy of God, saying yes to God and letting that flow through you, which is what Jesus brings. So in that sense, he's bringing something that did not exist at this point. There is a prefiguration of that. There is an anticipation of it. There is a harbingers in flashes here and there, but the full reality of God on earth, of being 100% divine and 100% human, Jesus has that. Adam does not. Please go on.
No, excellently said. Thank you for getting that. That's also pretty consistent with a lot of, especially I would say Aquinas probably recommends it too. Talks about how because of the fall of creation, its renewal at the end through Jesus is going to be more magnificent than ever it was, at the beginning. The end result is going to be also much greater. Sometimes they medieval commentators would refer to it as the happy fall, because Jesus is such a blessing that it more than makes up for all the mess that's in between. So there's definitely some of that, and I like how you bring that up, is that the way Gospel of John describes it is that we're heirs of creation, joint heirs. We're the sons, not just the stewards. And it's are keeping up with it as co-heirs, as people who own it, not just as the servant who's the hired hand. And so there's that. It's kind of, there's a step up, there's a qualitative difference even between what's happened in the past and what's happening in the future. All right, this is how most people see it when they see cosmos and Jesus talks about hating the world and whatnot. Is they think of this intermediate period. I brought up this passage in First Enoch because it parallels what we see in John chapter 1, that wisdom went forth to make her dwelling among the children of men, and she found no dwelling place. And so this is in the intertestamental literature already in the cognitive environment of the Jewish people. So when John writes his gospel, he says, he was in the world and the world was created by him, but the world did not recognize him. He came to what was his own, but his own people did not receive him. And so there was already an extant tradition of wisdom trying to come into the world and being rejected by its own world. God laid the pillars of the foundations of the earth through wisdom, consulted with wisdom. Wisdom was there for it all and has no place. So we see that parallel with Jesus. Again, the primordial epics highlight, and what I'm focusing on is the relationship that is torn asunder. And I really like how you describe that, this idea of Adam did not know God. And the idea of knowledge is something that, I know Shrikant, I know who you are, I see you on Zoom, but we've also been meeting each other regularly for well over a year now. And so how I knew you when I met you versus how I know you now, that is something that can only be acquired through experience. And so I love the analogy that you're giving is Adam is in the garden. He has the opportunity to know God, but it's not a one and one done, one and done. It's an experience. It's a relationship that grows over time, that grows and becomes more and more. But he just wants the fruit. He doesn't have a concept for exploring that and just like the relationship for its own sake, wanting the tree and the branches and all of it. He's just focused on the fruit. I've also brought up, it's for me, it's kind of funny when we look at the word knowledge, the tree of the knowledge of, blessing and calamity, of good and evil. And so what happens, it says the day you eat of it, you will die, is that word knowledge means to experience. And so to die right there that day is you experience calamity. It's not just conceptual knowledge. It's he's telling them, this is what you're going to get. You're going to have the experience of calamity if you touch this tree. He's like, sure, I want it. So anyhow, that's the state of being is, and that's probably a good example of what's taking place here, is we have the knowledge of calamity, the experience of calamity. This is the fruit. All of this, Cain murdering his brother Abel, the flood, the Tower of Babel, all of these primordial epics, the wars that we have in the world, all of that. This is the fruit of the tree of knowledge, the knowledge of calamity. It's the experience of calamity is this intermediate period that we're living in right now. And so, yeah, we all have the same fruit that Adam tasted. And we have intimate personal knowledge of it right here, right now. So I take us to Ecclesiastes. This is another book in the wisdom literature that we've talked about quite a bit, because through the whole book, he says, meaningless, meaningless, everything is meaningless. He has this, suddenly he comes to this knowledge, this experience that all of this stuff in the world is really quite meaningless. It's the fruit separate from the vine, separate from the branch, separate from the tree. It's meaningless. It's just empty. It's finite. And that's the revelation that we see in Ecclesiastes. And he's like, and therefore I hated life, because the work that is wrought under the sun is grievous unto me, for all is vanity, all of it is a vexation of spirit. What does it bring to me? Like, you're just going to die. And I don't mean that in a bad way, but that's his analogy that he gives. I'm going to become rich. I'm going to amass this huge fortune. And then what? I'm going to die, and I can't take it with me. In fact, I don't even know if I leave it behind, if the person that I give it to will be a fool or a wise man. I'm going to leave it behind, and I have no control over what it does. It's beyond me. And so paradoxically, I think that it's pointing to the answer, because John 12, Jesus says the same thing. He that loveth his life shall lose it, and he that hates his life in this world, hates the stuff here, the stuff that, Kohelet hates, when he says it's all vanity, he shall keep it unto the eternal life. And so I kind of like that idea, is that the secret to having that eternal life is to just acknowledge the fruit for what it is, as this empty thing when separate from the branch, when separate from the trunk, to use your analogy, Shrikant, which I really appreciate your input and what you have to say in all this. And that is section 2, our intermediate period of where we are, what our situation is, and leading into section 3.
All right, let's go back to the beginning of section 2. Actually, let's go back to a slide in section 1. All right, so now I'm going to just jump and connect this with another, one of my favorite books. This is the book by Julian Jaynes called The Origin of Consciousness in the Breakdown of the Bicameral Mind. The point he makes is that there was a bicameral mentality where there was God and man, and you heard voice of God, and you obeyed it. And that's what you did. That's how you functioned. So if you look at Adam before the fall. He is like that. The best he can do is to obey God. That's all he can do. He himself does not have an ability of coming up with knowledge of what he should do. He is separated from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. He does not know what he should do. He can only obey. That's all he can do. He's in that state. So in a very odd way, that book is actually showing you this story of humanity, and it parallels these three stages. So initially it is the bicameral mind, where things are very happy actually, because you're simply obeying God. The surrounding that you have is very well known. It is very comfortable. And by obeying God, you're able to live and be satisfied there. There is no angst that is there at this stage. It is a fairly stable environment. You know what to expect. Everything is in its place. Everything, and this is like the situation even in these very well set civilizations where you're just obeying the orders of your parents, your ancestors, your gods, and you're just operating in that way. Let's go to the next slide. All right, so now he has eaten the fruit and he has been thrown out of this predictable place which supported all his needs. He's out there. Okay, this is what James calls the breakdown of the bicameral mind. There is complete chaos. You don't know what to expect. You have to start working. You have to kind of figure out things. This entire section of 2, I do not understand well because I don't have a good grasp of, I've spent some time, I've been reading, going through the Old Testament, but I don't have a very good grasp of it. But with all of that, I still speak based on what I know. And I'm always trying not to look at individual words, but I'm trying to say, what actually explains this entire period? And really the one word that captures it is that this is the story of Israel. This is Israel. What is Israel? Israel is one who struggles with God. This is the struggle with God. Before was obeying of God. With the fall begins the struggle with God. It's the wrestling with God. It is really a stage where, now I have to say that it is a step forward in a very deep way, because now people are asking questions. You can see that beautifully in Ecclesiastics. Can you go to the next one, to the Ecclesiastics? One more slide. Yes. Now, see how profound this is for somebody to say all is vanity. All is vanity. Let me see. It is, so, okay, I want to add one more angle here. Okay, that is external and internal. In most of the part 1 and part 2, the story is largely external and it slowly becomes more and more internal. So in Solomon, there is a jump forward in the internality of the story. So for example, if you go back to the first part, what you see is There is this external thing, and you're trying to maintain that external world. And you're trying to do, there are laws that you have to obey in order to do that, and you're obeying those laws. So it's all about external action. It's all about action. Fast forward to John in part 3, it's going to be internal. Same issues are going to come back to internal. Okay, so let's go back to part 2 again. So let's look at this one, right? What is Ecclesiastes saying? The first sentence, it can be always interpreted in 2 ways. One, it is saying, what good are these fruits if you don't have the wine? Because they are going to decay and die. So you're saying something about things that are out there. And you're saying things about your words. What use are your words? Because you are incapable of struggling with God. You're not able to get to the truth. What you have are just little pieces which are going to die. So it is all vanity. That is just puffs of air that are coming out of your mouth. They mean nothing. They mean nothing because you have not gotten to God. You have not gotten to that. And that is you see, this Solomon is a giant compared to Adam before fall. This is the intermediate step. Okay, there is a lot of misery here. Okay, but it is not about misery or happiness. It is about God. Adam did not know God at all. He had no knowledge. He had no wisdom. Solomon asks God for one thing, wisdom. And in that action, he has made a quantum jump up. Still not there. He screws up at the end. But it is a giant step forward. It is prefiguring the third stage, where you live with God and the God lives in you. Okay. Again, coming back to the fruit. Jesus offers the fruit to you. Now that fruit has the life flowing through you, flowing through it. And he's inviting you to make that fruit part of you. It is the bread that becomes you. And by virtue of that, you become the branch that is going to bring forth more fruit. And you become son of God. You realize that in the third part, the struggle is going to end. Israel, the second part, is all about struggle with God. But you do need to do this in order to get to the second place, in order to get to the third stage. It is the same principle as cross. You have to go through this stage in order to have the eternal life, in order to have the knowledge. This is people struggling for knowledge. On a grand scale, Old Testament is the story of that. It is the struggle of knowledge. It is the story of immigrants who have lost their homeland and are trying to get back to the homeland. They are doing this journey is on one hand a physical journey. On the other hand, it is a spiritual journey. When you look at the progression that includes, Abraham and his progeny, then you you see the entire succession. Abraham, Jacob, Joseph, David, Solomon. There is a progression towards that inner kingdom. It is a progression. There is a lot more to go, but it is a real progression. It is struggle and it is progression. It is basically the suffering on the cross, stretched out in time as history. So that is how I understand this second section. Gary.
All right. I really like your take on that. For me, one of the signature things, and I already mentioned it, is that knowledge is a euphemism for experience. And so sometimes people look at the tree of life and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil and say, why did God want to keep Adam ignorant? And it's like, no, he's in the garden with God, experiencing God, growing in direct knowledge of God in perpetuity, presumably. That's the opportunity that's before him. And that the tree of the knowledge of calamity is the tree of the experience of calamity. He says, you're going to die. Don't do this. But it's there. There's that option. You can either learn through experience, spending time with God, or do this. And so here we are. We all have now intimate knowledge of calamity. We've seen death. We've had our loved ones die. We struggle. And that's what we all have to look forward to. I really like the whole idea of the cross being drawn out writ large, the whole human experience. It's all being like summed up. That's really what happens in the cross is all of human experience is summed up into a single focal point right there. And it's the whole. I'll just proceed with the next section from here. But thank you, Shrikant. Something that lots of times you'll hear the knowledge that people will use the phrase salvation, Jesus saved us, we're going to have eternal life, we're going to go to heaven, things like that. But a word that also comes up frequently is this word reconcile. And that was the one that really spoke to me as the whole story, especially the way you described it just now, Shrikant, is Israel means to struggle with God. And so like the goal of all of this is that we stop struggling, that we reconcile, that we could just put it all down. And it's funny that Jacob and the angel of the Lord are in a wrestling match because they're locked in an embrace, but it's a struggling embrace. And it's like what we're called to, the ultimate goal is to be in a loving embrace. Miroslav Volf wrote a book called Exclusion and Embrace. And that is his theme throughout his whole book and that's his goal. It's a kind of an ethics book on Christianity, and it focuses on this notion of reconciliation, as that's really what it's all about, is to be in a loving embrace with the other person. As that's, we're not trying to do discrete moral acts, we're trying to be reconciled with one another, and that's what we're shooting for. And that's what God is doing, and that's the unifying theme of the Old and New Testaments that comes to a head here in Jesus. So there's a lot of slides for this last section, but most of them are just verses from the Bible. And I selected a lot of them because whether you were aware of it or not, Shrikant, some of those, if you read it, you'd probably say, oh, I said this, or somebody else told you this. And so it's like, it so resonates with things that you've already said that I kind of picked them out to go over that. So yes, the unifying theme of the Old and New Testaments centers on God's attempts to bring this reconciliation. And so from the very beginning, as soon as the first patriarch is Abraham, and the first words that God speaks to him in verse 3 is, in thee all the families of the earth will be blessed. It's that there's this mission to bring blessing to all of humanity. And then you have elsewhere in the New Testament, God was in Christ reconciling the world unto himself, not imputing their trespasses unto them, not there just punishing people for their sins, but committed to us this word of reconciliation. And so that it's the bringing everything back together. This is something that sometimes I forget, but it's really important. Is this is like the ethical mandate of much of Jewish humanitarian work. Is this phrase tikkun olam, is to repair the world, and you'll see that frequently. They have organizations where that's like their number one core value is to acknowledge that the world is a mess, the world needs help, and we are here building it up. We're being those stewards of creation. We're repairing the world. We're repairing what has been broken. And so I have that, I like to bring that up. As priests of Eden, to follow Jesus is to reclaim that duty, to bring healing to the cosmos. The other thing I like about it, I have on the second line there, that last line, is that sometimes we think of, as if spirituality is an intellectual pursuit. That to be spiritual means to meditate, to say your prayers, to read scriptural things, to memorize the sages, to be well read, to be an intellectual. But through the whole, at least the Bible story of spirituality, it means to have an impact on the material sphere. A spiritual kingdom is one that doesn't neglect the poor. And that's the beautiful thing about the story of Solomon, is that it's prosperous and that he brings justice to everybody. And the court case, if you recall the story of Solomon, the court case is two prostitutes that come forward. It means that nobody is such a low station in life that they can't come to the king with their grievance, whatever it is. And that's, I think that's an overlooked section. Is we all look at it and say, oh, Solomon is so wise, he figured it out. He lives in a kingdom where everybody, regardless of station in life, is able to come to the king and have justice. And so that's the big thing is that spiritual wisdom is one which has an impact on the social and material spheres of life. We're not just intellectuals. We're there getting our hands dirty, fixing and repairing a broken world. That's my sermon for today. So, and so the rest of it, these are going to be like different parallel passages that kind of resonate with what we've already said. Peter, the apostle, this is, it's attributed to him. He says, "You are chosen." I use King James. I probably shouldn't have used King James, but I like the poetry of it. It says, "You're a chosen generation, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a peculiar people." He doesn't mean odd or obscene there. He just means unique, a unique people, that you should show forth the praises of him who's called you out of darkness and into his marvelous light. And then in Revelations, again, it's like he has made us kings and priests unto God and his Father. And so it's this reconciliation is resuming our role as mediators, as spending time with God on the holy mountain, bringing the divine, instantiating it, in bringing it to the instant of this world right here and right now. I don't know how familiar you are, Shrikant, with First John, the epistles of John,
I
or the
am.
letters of John.
I am.
Straight out of the Gospel of John. It's all the same themes resonated again and again. And so this is one that stood out because you've mentioned similar things in here. Beloved, let us love one another, for love is of God, and everyone who loves is born of God and knows God. He who does not love does not know God, for God is love. In this, the love of God was manifested towards us, that God sent his only begotten Son into the world, that we might live through him. In this is love, not that we loved God, but that he loved us. And this is a point you've made up so many times, is that John is called the beloved disciple, not because Jesus loved him more, but because he recognized that he is loved by God. And this whole section begins with the word by addressing the reader, beloved, not that we have loved God, but that he loved us. Know that you are loved by God. And he sent his Son to be the propitiation for our sins, Beloved, if God so loved us, we also ought to love one another. And so this obedience or this love, again, this really typifies, more of the virtue ethics that we're in modern Western society, we're alienated from, is that we're not loving or obeying because we're afraid of being punished, or anything like that. It's the natural response of having a realization of just how much love you have received. It's a child that wants to obey their parents, wants to make mom and dad happy because they know how much mom and dad loves them. That's the response. And here, two parallels, our passage that we dealt with today, paralleling with the letter of John. If the world hates you, keep in mind that it hated me first. If they persecuted me, they will persecute you also. They will treat you this way because of my name, for they do not know the one who sent me. And then in the letter of John, it says, do not marvel, my brethren, if the world hates you. We know that we have passed from death to life because we love the brethren. He who does not love his brother abides in death, and whoever hates his brother is a murderer. And you know that no murderer has eternal life abiding in him. And so it's interesting, this whole parallel between hate and love, and what's taking place in this hatred. It's a manifestation of a lack of that eternal life, which is a quality of living, eternity living, and eternity living expresses itself through love. And so it's saying, hey, look at this. The person that hates you, they don't have eternal life. They don't know how to love. They lack that knowledge. And I think this is my last selection of verses. And I selected them because they sandwich. This is the farewell discourse, the beginning and the end of it, John 13 and John 17. By this shall all men know that you are my disciples, that you have love one to another. And then John 17, and this was, I remember you said this was your favorite verse in the high priestly prayer of John 17. And thou hast given him power over all flesh, that he should give eternal life to as many as thou hast given him. And this is eternal life, that they might know thee, the only true God, and Jesus Christ, whom thou hast sent. And so there's this equation of to love God is to know God. To know God is to love God. And those who know God are going to respond with love. That's my section. And so we can back up to the beginning if you so desire.
All right, let's back up 2 slides. I think it's 2 slides.
This one?
Yes. Let's go with this because I think this captures everything. So what I want to point out is how different the relationship between man and God is in Gospel of John. This captures it beautifully. The first thing I want to say is that this word love is really, really difficult to get because we automatically think of love in the way in which there is modern usage. The agape that is talked about is primarily love of God for his creation. So the thing is, you can't really fully get this until you get that concept. It is this full acceptance. It is the root loving the fruit through the branches. It's that sap that is flowing, that naturalness of flow. It's saying yes to the Tao and everything that Tao produces. It is thou saying yes to itself. So so that is the hardest part, because it is really fundamentally what is being done here is, it is you have to go back to John 1. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. Now, what is going on between God and the Word? That is love. That is what is being talked about here. That and nothing else. It is, I translate it as consciousness. It is kind of this deep of being conscious of God. It is saying, it is affirmation, it is saying yes to God, to nature, to thou. So it is something which is profoundly metaphysical, it is profoundly conscious, it is profoundly moral. I mean, so that is the concept here. I mean, the simplest way to look at it is basically the love between God and his Son. And it is reciprocal by its nature, because of who God is and because of who the Son is. And it is this flow, it is this natural back and forth flow that happens between that. And that is what is being taught. That is what Jesus is trying to transmit to people, to us. That is what John is talking about. John gets this, okay? John gets this in a very deep way. So that's why I think his formulations of this point of love is the deepest things that I've seen in the Bible. Now, the interesting thing is that all the words in Bible have this multifaceted meaning. And the word love here is the hallmark of that. It is a very integrated, complex thing that is going on between the thou and a consciousness which is analogous to thou. I love the word analogous. It's, again, I'm bringing now the terms of Julian Jaynes. He says consciousness is analogous to existence, or the word is analogous to God. It is analogous because it is the similarities, the imitating, the reciprocating is happening. The word is being shaped by God. The concept that you have is being shaped by existence. And there is no walls between them. You're not trying to protect your concept. You're not trying to protect your consciousness from what you're looking at. You are actually looking at it. It's full of light. There is light flowing back and forth between consciousness and existence. That is a kind of thing that is being talked about. I'm not able to capture the richness of this word because it is a very deep word. It is, so I'll throw out a bunch of things. So it is the ideal. It is what you're looking up to with admiration, respect, that is contained in it. There is virtue. It is all about seeing. It is about clarity of perception. It is all about hearing, obeying, following up with action. The action is part of it. There is nothing like loving and not doing anything. That's a contradiction in terms. So it is integrated into action. It's like singing. Like I'm now going into Bhagavad Gita's metaphors in order to talk about this, what is going on between. Nanishwar puts it beautifully. The way he makes this point of what this love is. He's saying, and remember that wisdom is there. So this is made possible by wisdom. This is, again, in modern usage of love, wisdom is not included in it. Whereas wisdom is deeply integrated into this concept of love. It is the word. It is the word, Jesus is wisdom of God. So that wisdom, and it is that love of wisdom for God and God for wisdom that is being captured here. So let me use Nanishwar's metaphors. All I'm trying to talk about is this concept of love. Okay. So way in which Nanishwar puts it, this is in his commentary on chapter 11 of Bhagavad Gita, when he's describing the word Om. Om is the word for Brahma. Brahma is the Tao, it's the Father. So he's saying, how can you name Brahma? How can you name the Tao? It's ridiculous. It has no name. So what is this thing that we use words? Because all the words are vanity, right? But what is this? So he says, let me give you a metaphor. When you have your own child that is just born, you're holding it in your hands and you give it a name. You give it a name. And when you speak to it lovingly, with full understanding that you will do everything and anything for the child, that is how you say the word. It is all your heart, all your strength, all your thought, all your actions, everything that you're capable of. And the word is carrying that. And if you do that, the child will respond to you. The little infant is going to respond to you. That is what love is. And that is what word is. So in this third part, we have reached that stage. There is no more struggle. There is just being with God. I mean, the way in which Nanishwar describes it is that you are in light. You're completely surrounded by light. Wherever you look, you see no darkness because you are at the root. You are at the center. That's how he describes it. So that is my understanding of this third part. Thank you, folks. I need to step away for a short time. Please continue the discussion. I will rejoin as soon as I'm done with my call. Gary, over to you. Gary and Evanique, please take it.
Yeah. I actually, is Nalini still here?
You know what? She is not. Oh, yes, she is. I see her now.
Well,
Nalini?
I was gonna ask if anybody wants to, if anybody's been taking notes, this is the time to speak up or to pitch in to give us your thoughts. But I always, I wanted to ask Nalini especially if she had anything to say or any comments. And I wanted to give her priority if there was something she wanted to say. That's okay. I don't have to call her out. Anybody else can speak up.
So if anyone has any questions or comments, you can type exclamation point in chat like Joe just did. Joe, you can go first.
So I think things, I really appreciated the presentation very much. Actually, Nalini, would you like to speak?
Oh, she can't unmute. Hold on.
That's a
Hold
problem.
on. Give me 1 second. Okay, try now.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Gary. I think today, I will be very honest, was the first time that I was able to understand a little bit. And it's not because you don't explain it nicely, or it's just, it's my knowledge is very, very shallow about all this. So I don't know that. And that's why I think it was hard for me to understand. I did read, and today I will be very honest, Shrikant and you just did a wonderful job for me. And the explanation of love was amazing for me. And the darkness and the light, the difference between that, and then of course the parallel to what it is in Gita also. I also loved the analogy that you gave about Shrikant when you met him the first time, and then as you are getting to know him, there are these experiences which enhance your knowledge of Shrikant. And I personally felt that analogy was beautiful for me to understand more about it. So thank you for everything. I love the way, of course, you break everything in, usually in 3 parts, and then Shrikant explains it and you explain it. I also wanted to point out on each slide, you have the images, and those images, I just wanted to say, are beautiful and they mean a lot. So just wanted to say, everything was just wonderful. The questions will always be there, lots of questions, but I just need to dig deeper to understand it. So thank you. And I will let Evanique or you, just go on from here. But I just wanted to thank you all for this beautiful explanation of everything.
I say thank you, Nalini. That's I'm in retrospect, I'm looking back as I could have gone in more detail over some of the pictures. I'll remember to do that because I do choose them, and sometimes with a specific reason. like the one of Pope Francis, that one really spoke to me. And it's just, I'm just so touched that we have the story of the foot washing in John chapter 13. The whole discourse starts with the foot washing. And so it touches me to see that, in churches, they replicate that scenario. They have that as a ritual that it still continues in our tradition.
Yes. Yeah.
And for the head of the whole church to do it, the Pope is doing it. He's on his knees. And I don't know if anybody remembers this, but shortly after becoming the Pope, there was a scandal because he was in the Vatican where he was attending a church, and he walked over to the side of the church and walked into the confessional and gave his confession to a priest. And everybody's like, why is the Pope confessing his sins? and nobody knew what to do with it. And so from the very beginning, his focus was to demonstrate humility in all that he did.
I love the image you had for, I think it was the third section, love. And it was a beautiful, beautiful image, I think. I mean, all images are very symbolic to what you explain. But I love every single image that you have there. Just wanted you to know.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nalini, and thank you, Gary. Up next, I have Joe.
I think one of the major things that breakthroughs that I had personally was Shrikant's changing of the word hatred to loveless. I mean, I think that is absolutely critical, because what does it actually mean to be loveless? And I actually just looked it up and everything, and that it's turning your back. It's becoming disconnected. You're becoming disconnected from people. That's the risk when you're loveless. So if you think about it in its most rational way, it's even the idea, if you're loveless, it can lead to you being distant from the people. And then you can also say that it leads to an indifference towards others and even anger. So it's a huge risk. So what are you doing? You're turning your back on God. And what does that mean? Then you're turning your back on the truth. So the idea that truth, and you can even link this, I'm going to link it to Stoicism in a way, is this idea of being pro-social. If you're turning your back on other people, if you're not necessarily loving others, you're turning your back on humanity. And it kind of gets to some of the things that Gary was talking about too, with humanity was created in God's house for God. But this idea that you're turning your back on God, you're turning your back on humanity. And it also insinuates something very important. Another thing that's very important is that we also, we have the capacity to love, and that we choose not to. And we have the capacity to receive love. And if we're loveless, we reject it. So that rejection is then, essentially the same thing that Adam did in a way. So I think that contributes to the fall of man, the idea of it anyway. I contrast that just with hatred and a little bit. Because, the word hatred, let's just say if you were going to go with the word hatred, there could be several different reasons for that. It could be your ignorance. It could be because you feel like, you've been betrayed in some way. It could be a number of reasons as to why you hate. It could be you don't like necessarily somebody having more power or control over you, or things along those lines. there's a whole list of things, but loveless really does capture you distancing yourself from God. It's showing what's missing. And that's what I think that's why that translation makes, because I honestly was thinking about the word hate and what does it really mean to hate someone else? And, it conjures up all kinds of injustices that may have occurred. And in this case, it's not necessarily, it's not an injustice, it's a rejection of God. So I think loveless actually captures the essence of what we're trying to communicate with this in this particular instance. So I thought that was absolutely a breakthrough for me. What was the second point? The second point was the rejection of truth. What does that mean, right? So that we're rejecting God, and I think that's in this particular instance. But even whenever you reject truth, some degree of truth brings order to the world. What you believe to be true. What it helps you make sense of things. So when you reject it, you can fall into some degree of meaninglessness. That you're actually actively saying, that something that is true, you're saying, I'm turning my back on it. And I think that has a way of creating a certain amount of disorder in our worlds and chaos. And that's true. Just think about it in the most basic of terms, right? If maybe this is not the best example, but let's just say if you continuously drink, it's not good for you, right? And you're going to reject that notion. Well, then you're going to suffer. There's a certain, repercussions that come along with that. So it holds true just in any case. If you reject truth in general, what you know to be fact, or what you believe to be fact, what is in front of you, then you're going to have a certain amount of disorder in your life. And I think sometimes the rejection, this is the problem that I have with a pure rejection of principles that you can find in back to the Greeks or in back to the Romans, or in certain the wisdom traditions. There's a rejection of those things, and it's kind of like you're throwing the baby out with the bathwater. Is the way I would look at that, if you know where I'm going with that. I don't want to go down that road, but anyway, the importance of reconciliation is also critical as well. It's critical because reconciliation allows for a certain degree of harmony to exist in the world. And what does it then take to reconcile with another individual? What is the process that goes on with reconciliation? And the process is that you essentially you seek to understand the other person's perspective and as to why they may have done something in the first place. There's this part of you that can dogmatically say, I'm supposed to forgive that person, that person's angry. But then another step further, true reconciliation, is to understand why a person's angry in the first place. And if you do understand that, then you can accept that person much easier. And that does bring a certain degree of harmony to both you, maybe not to the other person, but you at least have a better understanding. And what is that? That's seeking truth and wisdom, right? So you're pursuing virtue in that regard. You know, so and if you have well, I'm not going to go to it. All right, and then what's my last point? My last point is just this. It comes back to love and recognizing love, recognizing God's love, and keeping His commandments. And so some people will say sometimes, and I agree, it can be dogmatic to you know, keep commandments per se. But you can't deny the fact that some of these commandments or rules or axioms, whatever you want to call them, bring a certain amount of order to the universe and to our lives. And so when God says what it means to love me is to follow my commandments and to follow, to seek the light, you know, I would say there's two things there. You know, there's this idea that you're seeking something that you believe to be true. You're seeking wisdom, one, but you're also respecting the fact why these laws may exist in the first place. And you're not necessarily just rejecting them out of hand. You're contemplating why they exist. And you're contemplating why they exist is an act of love for God, because you're getting to know why the laws exist in the first place. And that's what I think is partially means what it means to know, to love God, right? So you know you love God because you're seeking the truth, which God claims to have in this particular instance. So, and that holds true, I think, with many virtue ethics philosophies. So those are the four major points.
Gary, do you want to respond?
No, I thought those were really good. I was taking notes as we go through it. And that's kind of the big hurdle between like as you're saying is like there's if you love me you'll keep my commandments, but you know it's hard to wrap my head around it, but even when Jesus, you know, the Gospels were there, the Jewish tradition had already arrived at the conclusion that all of the commandments were summed up in the command to love. And so there's the sense where all of the laws, if we love, all of the laws are being kept as we do that. And so it's not like it's not as if there's only one command that Jesus gives to love one another. That one command captures the entire universal law. You know, all of it is there in that one command because it's the summary of it all. Yeah. Oh, what were you gonna say?
I was going to say, no, that's brilliant. You know, that's brilliant because, you know, it's almost like there's this universal principle, right? Love, that you're putting everything over, which means that the commandments themselves, that are rules, you know, can be revisited in a way if you're seeking truth. And I'm not saying that, but if it's under the idea, what does it really mean to love? And you're continuously seeking what that wisdom is. And the pursuit of that will ultimately lead you to the truth. And that's the important part, I think, that that's the continuing seeking for knowledge, is that part of that is what I believe that, you know, God's calling you to do.
I can't remember the specific day, but it's like every year you know, I get emails from my Jewish Learning, and they'll bring stuff up, And so every year they commemorate the story of Rabbi Hillel, which first century, and somebody comes up to him and says, I'll become a convert if you can recite all the Torah to me while standing on one foot. And so what he does is he stands on one foot and he says, what is loathsome to you, do not do to somebody else. And then he puts his foot down. He says, the rest is details. Now go study. And so that story, this whole idea of love one another, love your neighbor as yourself, this was the zeitgeist. Everybody already knew it. And, and that's why, Jesus in Gospel of John and in the epistles of John, he says, this is not, he says it's a new commandment, but then also backs himself up and says, it's not really a new commandment, it's an old commandment. We've all heard this before. Love one another. Everything is there. And so it's easy to forget it because we get caught up in the details, but it's all right there. That's all I got. I'll stop now.
Thank you, Joe, and thank you, Gary. Up next, I have Ella.
Sure. I just a couple of comments on it just sort of took me back to I think the to earlier time, and the deepest part of what I learned in religion was, about that love story that we've been discussing, the deep love between, as Shrikant pointed out, that circular flow of energy and love between God and Jesus. And I was reminded at the same time, which I think can be elusive at times, that the love can, still flows toward, me, all of us, and so because I also learned that as well. And so the deepest parts of what was there are, I guess, still there. And the other part of what Gary had mentioned was that I really was so grateful to hear, and was a very meaningful part of my own early experience in the church, was the humbleness and the understanding of, and having great empathy toward the poor. I learned that deeply, and so I do think that that was an important thing, and you don't often hear that anymore, because especially things took a turn maybe a decade ago, maybe more, about becoming prosperous and introducing prosperity somehow into Christianity. I didn't really ever get that, but anyway, I appreciated you bringing that aspect up, Gary. And I liked the fact that Shrikant tied this into the Tao, and I found that very helpful as I try to understand, and transcend and find the truth of the whole, because I think the stories are different, but the essence of the stories may be the same. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you, Ella. Gary, did you want to respond? Okay, so I'm actually going to go next if no one else has any questions or comments. So let me just flip back over. Okay, so first of all, Gary, I loved your presentation. Always great. You and Shrikant, I love the way you do it this way. I think the first thing I wanted to talk about is when you when you were talking about having enough knowledge to get to the fruit, and that was something that was impactful to me because I can be guilty of that, right? Like I think we all kind of pray to God when we want something or something's really tragic that's happening in our lives and we want comfort. It's like we go to God when we want something, like we want the fruit of it. We don't really work to get to the knowledge of God. And I think once we do that, um, I think this passage shows why when you guys were talking about um, the cosmos and humanity, and I just, for that, it was when Sheree Kant talked about the esteem less in Greek, um, and that Adam doesn't know God and he's not conscious. And I think that there was no way he could love God, right? You have to be conscious of it. You have to, loving takes an action. I think we talked about this in previous meetups, that love is an action. It's a verb. You can't just say I love you and not show it. And so um if you do that, then you just want the fruits, right? When you just say you love someone and you don't mean it, you just want the fruits of you want something they have. Um it's a false love. And it's the same thing with God. If you're just saying, I want the fruits of God and I just want God to do stuff for me, that's not love. Um I think when you think of love, it like you're taking your troubles to him, but you're also listening and you're also trying to, I do not like the word obey because it feels like it feels harsh and inauthentic. Like when you obey somebody, it's out of fear almost. But I think when you love God, you want to be like him. You want to please him. You want to serve him. Just like he wants to serve us, as Jesus showed us and throughout his life that he was a servant. And God is a servant. He made us, he created us. And then we're here to serve him. And by serving him, if you're really serving him, you're really serving humanity. So um, I thought that point was brilliant. Um, I think the second point I wanted to talk about is to know God is to love God. And if you uh, know God, you will love. And I think I went into that for my first part, so I'm not going to belabor it. But I think when we and it was in section 3 where it's like God's plan is to reconcile the cosmos. I love that word, reconcile. And then Gary, when you said the goal is to stop struggling, and the goal is really to lovingly embrace rather than struggle. And I think of that, when you love, true love is, loving without expecting anything back. Like, how many of us can really say that we love God and don't expect anything back from God? Just, we're loving God just to love God. I know I can't say that a majority of the time. Like, I'm looking for something from God. I want something from God. And to truly love is to love without expectation. And if we could do that, we could love people like that. Not to expect anything from them, but just to love them because they are human beings. Even when they do things that we think are heinous or horrible, how hard is it to still love them, right? Um, and it doesn't mean like you allow them in your life if they're damaging or abusive or anything like that. I'm not talking about that. But um, to really just, in a sense, just to see their humanity. I think that's key. And I was thinking when Joe was talking about God is in us. So when Joe said, when you're loveless, you turn your back on people. and turning your back on humanity and turning your back on God, I think about it as if God is in us. So if we truly believe that God is in us and we're human and divine, if we turn our back on somebody, or if we refuse to love someone, we're refusing to love God. Jesus loved the people that killed him. You know, it doesn't mean that he just took the abuse. I'm not talking about just the cross. And he told them the truth that they needed to hear. But he still loved them. You know, he was still able to forgive them. So I think that's all I had. I just thought this was great. So I'm going to stop now. And up next, we have Joe, followed by Nalini.
Oh, sorry. Really quickly, just this is only worth one sentence, is that to make sure there's a distinction between the idea of being unloving and someone that's unloving and loveless. There's a big difference, in the sense that or unlovable, so to speak, and somebody being loveless. That's even there's a huge distinction between those words. Anyway, I just thought I'd bring that back up. But I think the other part is that I think that's important to mention is that Jesus is pretty much reminding his disciples that they have a responsibility. And this is the idea too. This is important. If you're going to follow, Christ, or follow the truth, you have a responsibility to do what you believe to be the right thing to do, right? And that is kind of, in a way, how you can transform a society. And I don't want to go too far, but even in the sense that you can even bring up existentialists like Kierkegaard's Knight of Faith, this idea that, how the Knight of Faith is somebody that doesn't necessarily look to social norms. They do what they absolutely believe to be the right thing to do, and no matter what the circumstances may be. And when Christ is saying, basically, he who hates me hates my Father also, it's really important to, to consider that, because essentially the norm may be to persecute Christians. And so in that particular instance, understand that those individuals, that you will meet, great resistance. But just know that those individuals that hate you also hate God, and that gives you a strength to kind of persevere. I think the underlying message is that you believe something to be the right thing to do, you should do it, and that's no matter what the social norms may be. If you are, if you have certain information that you can act upon that you think is just, then you do it. And I think that this is sometimes when we think about the basis of things like the civil rights movement, this is where I think Christianity kind of is, kind of very powerful, in the sense that it seeks to do the right thing despite the societal norms. And I think that that's the apostles, in a way. If you look back, they were seeking to follow Christ despite being persecuted. And again, that's how you transcend society in certain circumstances, by not necessarily acquiescing to something that you think to be unjust. And I understand there are probably examples where people have done things in the name of religion that actually are completely unjust. And I'm not denying that either. I'm just saying that there are two sides to it as well. And that sometimes, the idea ultimately is to stand up for what you believe to be the right thing to do. And there are people that have done that, like Seneca, or people, even, that, or Cato, if you want to, say that there are people in the past that have done that. And that's why maybe I think Cato is in purgatory as to not in hell, even though, prior to Christ. But in Dante's Inferno. But anyway, I think that that's actually just worth mentioning, is this idea of what it really means to follow the truth, because it may not necessarily always be beneficial to you personally, physically, but it will spiritually.
Thank you, Joe. Up next, I have Gary, followed by Nalini and Ella.
I think actually Nalini might be next, but just quickly, I wanted to say, you had mentioned that you like the format, Evanique, and I love it too. I would prefer to do it this way with Shrikant, going back and forth. I think it's paced better and allows people to digest and take better notes and better interaction. And then my only other comment on that is I was actually thinking of something else you said, Evanique, about to love is to love without expectation. The only thing I would add to that is that the relationship is its own reward. We get something out of it. We get a friend, we get to be with somebody. And that's kind of the idea of loving God and knowing God, is to enjoy that intimacy, which I think is kind of the point of what's going on. But yeah, that's it.
Thank you, Gary. Up next, I have Nalini, followed by Ella.
Hi. So I just have two comments to make. One was a love for God or love for his creations. And I think Shrikant explained it very well. And I really enjoyed the explanation of that. For Gary, I do have a question, not a question, but if he can explain or shed some light on when you talked about God's plan to reconcile the cosmos. And then the other thing I wanted to mention was when Shrikant did the comparison, or with Gita, and he talked about Om, Thou, and Brahma. I thought that was so nice because it's easy for me to understand that, because I do have some knowledge of the Hindu philosophy and the Gita. So I thought that was so beautifully done, because that is when he mentioned the love between thou and, of course, the analogous consciousness and the word. So I thought those similarities that he explained to us, they were beautiful. So just those comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Nalini. Gary, did you want to say anything before I move on to Ella?
So this is it's kind of a really controversial thing. The answer to your question. One of them is certainly in this intermediate period. That's what it means to love God, is to be engaged in God's mission of love for the entire cosmos. And the pain and the suffering isn't just something that's endured, is that we're kind of on this mission to reconcile it, to bring healing to it all. And then when people see that, they're attracted to, they want to join on that mission because it's a blessing towards everyone and everything around them. But you were also asking about the big plan, the overarching, like God's plan to reconcile the whole cosmos. And that's where it gets really controversial. Actually, it's controversial the whole way because some people think of it as an intellectual, spiritual pursuit that doesn't involve us actually doing anything. That we reconcile the world by teaching about Jesus and getting people to say the prayer and to come to church. And that's our mission, is to get people to do that. That's an opinion that lots of people have. I don't agree with it. I think that our mission of reconciliation, to follow God, means to do what Jesus did. And he was out there, touching the lives of the poor, healing the sick, feeding the hungry. And that's part of the mission too. It's all there. It's getting your hands dirty. A significant theme that pervades the whole Bible from the very beginning all the way to Revelation is this idea of the culmination of the age, the end of all things. Sometimes people think of it as judgment, but if you turn to the very last chapter of the whole Bible in Revelation, it's a new city that comes down, and it talks about the tree of life and this river that's flowing out of it, and that the leaves are a balm that heals, are an ointment that heals all of the nations, and that there are no more tears. And and it's the picture of God's judgment isn't just totally about wrath and punishment and getting rid of the evildoers. It's like where it's this painful process that's sometimes described as like giving birth to a child. And as soon as that child has been given birth, you forget about the pain. I know that mothers don't really forget about the pain. They remind me of it all the time. But it's replaced with joy, is what I'm getting at. And that's the analogy that's given. And so the story of like our reconciliation as we're enduring this pain, as we're going out into the world, the whole idea of the eschatology and revelation and all of this stuff in the end of times, those are supposed to be stories of hope that let us know that God's plan is to bring reconciliation to all of it. And the spiritual life is an invitation to participate in that plan, to be right here, right now, doing the thing that God intends to do, and to bring reconciliation just even to the people around us. I hope that's an answer for you, Nalini. I'm trying my best.
No, it is. I just wanted a little bit detailed explanation, and you did. You did give me that. So thank you. Thank you so much.
Now, I am not nearly as knowledgeable as with the Gita or the Tao. I have a little bit of knowledge with both. I think Joe and Evanique probably know more than I do. But the idea that we are divine in our core and that we are created divine is something that's present in Genesis 1. And I was actually thinking of the Gita and the Atman and the Brahma when I made the slide there. And so this alienation that we have with God is also an alienation from ourselves. And this idea of being attached to the world and the injuries that we do to others are injuries that we do to ourselves. And so I see a lot of congruence between the idea of Atman and Brahman, and also of like our own divine nature and being reconciled to God. Atman is Brahman. And so there is that, it's right.
Got it.
Yes. Yeah, that is true. Yeah.
And so that's this, it's almost the same reconciliation as what's taking place here in John and throughout Christian tradition.
Thank you again.
Thank you, Nalini and Gary. Up next, I have Ella.
Yeah, I was just thinking that that of the reconciliation, aspect, and that we are all divine, as Gary was saying, and alienated. And I was thinking that a lot of people in society today are feeling alienated. And so, yeah, Jesus turned over the tables, and he wanted to make the church a place of worship. I get that. And I respect that. I think if we reason, if we do what, and we try to see the whole entire picture, everyone's situation, the suffering, is very difficult. And it's not always represented in different ways by different groups, because we're projecting outward. We want to blame. It's understandable. There is some truth to it, but there's some truth to other things we may not be noticing. So the thing is, it's complex, and we have to just think as well as react, and love and care about everyone. And those are my thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you, Ella. Up next, I have Joe. Or unless Gary, did you want to say something before I move on?
I don't want to take too much time on this, but I teach Bible study also, and you guys might be familiar with the story of Jonah. In the Bible, he gets swallowed by a fish, all that stuff. The theme of the story, first, it's not about the fish. That's what we learn as kids, but that's not what the story is about. Is Jonah can't come to grips with the fact that God loves Jonah's enemies. And the story from beginning to end is his resentment, and actually ends with him yelling at God, arguing with God, telling God that he wishes he was dead because he's mad at God. And that's kind of how it ends. And God saying is like, hey, why shouldn't I have compassion for all of these other people, and their children and their animals? And so it's sometimes we like point to the Bible, the Old Testament, say it's this angry God, fire and brimstone and all that. But the theme of Jonah is God's overwhelming compassion. And this is the prophet. This is a really important thing, is that Jonah is supposedly the prophet from God. He can't handle that. He doesn't want to believe in a God of compassion. He wants to believe in a judgy God that's going to go ahead and punish people. And it's the theme is this Schadenfreude, this pleasure that we take in other people's misfortunes. If you've ever watched a action movie, that's the feeling you get when the good guy wins. He's given it to them. And the book of Jonah is saying, no, that's wrong. God has compassion for that guy, for that bad person. God loves him too. So yeah, I just wanted to, I know it's kind of like a rabbit trail, but I kind of wanted to draw attention to that. This theme is throughout the whole Bible, and just kind of leave it at that. So Joe, you're up.
No, I think that's a profound point. I really do. It's always, we have a tendency to kick somebody when they're down if they've done something, especially if they've done something horrible, or even if they're associated with it. And we sometimes forget, just that necessarily we shouldn't necessarily give in the mob spirit, or let our anger just dictate our actions. So I'll just leave that at that. One really quick point I thought that was also important to point out is that how Christ talks about the Holy Spirit, specifically, and how that is that will guide the disciples after he's gone. And I think that that's the idea of spirit and matter that you guys talked about in the beginning is really important and central to that theme. And maybe Gary, you could expand on that a little bit. But I also think that there's this other element that, again, Christ is prepping everyone for his, his death and his crucifixion. And why that's powerful is that it gives you something to say, all right, well, Christ endured the cross, so therefore, whatever it is that I think to be right and whatever I need to do, I can do it. I can work through this. That this is something that I can. There's somebody that's gone through worse, and that's a very powerful thing when you're, if you really believe that to be the case. So it leads you to do the right thing in spite of everything else around you. So it's a very powerful thing. So in a way, the reason I bring that up is because I find that is the spirit of Christ that's kind of moving you, and that is almost holy in nature. If you're going to do something, again, I understand that in many cases that people have distorted religion and used it for their own purposes and to gain power. But let's just say it's something as simple as defending somebody that nobody else will defend, that nobody else likes, just for no good reason. That's a powerful thing where you think about it, you do what you think is right and you keep in mind, and that's almost like a Holy Spirit. That's a spirit of sort that's actually moving you towards doing the right thing. And I think that that's powerful, and I think that that's when Christ talks about leaving, yes, he's leaving the disciples and they're sad, but now he's everywhere. And that's central to the whole story that we're talking about here, is that Christ's spirit is with all of us, and that Christ is specifically telling us that he's leaving us with the Holy Spirit. So anyway.
Well, rephrase that question from the first part again. Was it about the presence of the
spirit and matter that you talked about in the beginning? Spirit and matter. You actually used the word material in the beginning.
Yeah. So if you might be familiar with early Christianity, especially in the 2nd and 3rd centuries, there was almost a schism between what we would say proto-orthodoxy and Gnosticism. And in Gnostic Christianities, they believe that you had God, and then you had these emanating deities, iterations that are separate, this hierarchy of divine beings. And somewhere along this hierarchy, one of them created the material realm. And the material realm, it's very Platonic. Plato talks about these forms that exist in the spiritual realm, wherever they are. And then you have the material realm, and never the twain shall touch. They're kind of separate things. And so Gnosticism was very Platonic in that sense. And they would also often attribute anything that's material as impure and is not from God, especially not directly. And so our attachment to the world and to physical things is considered evil and corrupting. And then how you respond to that is a whole nother matter. And so that's a key element, especially when we look at Gospel of John and 1 John, is just a recognition recognizing just at the root that God created the whole world. He created all of it, and it's a good thing. And so and that's what I was starting off and just getting at, is that the world itself is part of God's good creation. And to not fall into the trap of thinking, because you see iterations of it right here in the chapter that we're at about loving of the world, is not getting caught, just not forgetting that. And that John uses the word world in two different senses, and I liked Stricant's analogy, is like, if we love the fruit but not the tree, we're missing the whole point. And that's what's going on when John talks about having this love of the world, is to love the world and the things there, and to not love the one who made it, is to miss the whole point. You're not going to even use this properly. You're done. And that's why they're rejecting. You can have it all. That's really what it's saying, is if you love Jesus and you understand who he is and you understand God, you have it all. You're able to fully enjoy this material realm and everything that we have, because you understand your place in it and how it all relates. So yeah, that's what I was kind of getting at, is to not fall into the trap of thinking that the things themselves, are evil, at their core. They're part of everything. It's all part of God's good creation.
Thank you. That was beautiful, Gary.
Thank you.
That was very nice.
Yeah.
Well, I have one other question. If Ella is still there, did you get the links that I sent?
Yes, I did. Thank you so much. I will definitely get that book. It sounds fascinating.
For me, it was, and my professor recommended it, and in the midst of writing my thesis, I got so much to do. I went ahead and read it, got it on audiobook and listened to it. And it was just lovely from beginning to end.
Thank you, Gary. Joe, did you want to add anything?
No, actually, no. I think Gary actually really captured it well, with the fruit and the tree, and actually Shrikant's example of that, and the idea of the whole. And the only thing I would add, it's almost like it's like loving the king. It's like the kingdom of God in a way, like at that point, right? Because it's something that's, you're seeing the whole, in a way. Anyway, that's all. It goes back to your other point earlier, that we're just living here in the kingdom of God.
Thank you, Joe. If anyone else has any questions or comments, you can type exclamation point in the chat. If not, I'm going to go up and go to talk about some other meetups that are coming up. So on Friday, or tomorrow, Friday, March 17th, it's Bring Your Own Metaphors. So this is where we're going to explore the power of metaphors. Please bring your favorite metaphor to the table and express, what that metaphor means to you and how it's impacted you. So that's happening tomorrow night, and that's going to be fun. I haven't dealt with metaphors in years, so that's something for me to think about. And then on Saturday, we have at 5 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, we have Asian Philosophies, Western Philosophy in China in 19th century. And that'll be hosted by Jason Ping. And then Sunday, March 19th, we have Great Plays at 5 p.m. Explore classic plays across history, introduction to this series. And that's happening on Sunday at 5 p.m. And then on Sunday night at 9 p.m., it's our Bucky series, and it's Bucky for Designers. Everyone Designs by, and that will be hosted by Kurt McNamara. So that's all that we have coming up. Oh, and of course, there's Maritza with Poetic Mondays, featuring Irish poets, and collaborative poetry on magic and mystical. So that's what we have coming up. Does anybody have anything to add? Well, with that said, thank you everyone for coming. Of course, thank you all for your contributions. Thank you, Gary, for being here and just enlightening us every week. So it's so appreciated. So thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you guys. Thank you all.
Thank you. Good night,
Gary. Good night, Evanique. Good night,
night.
Nalini. Good night,
Good night. Good night.
Good
Tony,
night.
and everybody.